The unexpected discovery. In the dense underbrush of a sprawling forest on a newly colonized planet, David trekked alongside his loyal dog, Rover. The air was crisp, carrying the tangy scent of alien flora. As they moved through the thickets, Rover, a robust shepherd with keen senses, suddenly darted ahead with a low growl. "Hey, what's got into you?" David called out, his boots crunching over the undergrowth as he tried to keep pace. The dog stopped at a small clearing and barked fiercely at something obscured by bushes. Approaching cautiously, David parted the leaves and froze. Before him lay a figure unlike any he had ever seen, a creature with shimmering blue skin, delicate and frail, obviously in pain. Its chest heaved with labored breaths, and its eyes, vast and violet, watched him warily. "Easy there," David whispered, both to Rover, who had started to whine, and to the alien, attempting to show he meant no harm. He knelt down, examining the alien from a safe distance. "You're far from home, aren't you?" The alien made a soft clicking sound, its hand moving slightly towards a wound on its side that seemed to pulse with a gentle light. David assessed the situation. No ordinary human had ever encountered a live Krelth up close without a full envoy. This was uncharted territory. Reaching into his backpack, David pulled out a water bottle and a basic first aid kit. "I'm going to help you," he declared more to himself than to the alien, unsure if it understood him. He treated the wound with care, applying antiseptic and a bandage as best he could. The alien's clicking grew softer, a sign of distress easing, perhaps. "There you go. Let's get you somewhere safe." Understanding the gravity of his decision, David gently lifted the alien with Rover's help. The dog, now calm, seemed to understand the need for gentleness, nudging the alien's back reassuringly as they moved. As they trekked back to his homestead, David used his communicator to ping his neighbor, Jenny, who lived a few kilometers away. "Jen, it's David. I need your help with something unusual." He spoke into the device. "What's up?" Jenny's voice crackled with static. "Can you meet me at my place? It's important, and bring your medical kit, please." "You got it, Dave. Be there in 10, she replied, a note of concern in her tone. By the time David reached his barn, Jenny was already there, her brow furrowed in curiosity. As he laid the alien down on some hay inside the barn, her eyes widened in astonishment. "David, what in the stars did you bring home this time?" "It's a Krelth, I think," David responded, watching Rover lay down beside the makeshift bed, his senses still alert. Jenny approached cautiously, her professional curiosity overtaking her initial shock. She knelt beside the alien, checking its vitals with tools from her kit. "This is beyond my pay grade, David. But I'll do what I can." Together, they stabilized the alien, ensuring it was comfortable and secure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the barn, David looked at Jenny, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thanks for helping. Without you, I'd be lost." Jenny smiled, patting his shoulder. "What are neighbors for, right? But we're going to have to figure out what to do next, Dave. You realize this changes everything." David nodded, looking back at the alien, whose breaths had steadied. "Yeah, I know. But we'll figure it out. Together." As night embraced the homestead, a quiet understanding passed between the two humans and the dog, all committed to the care of a creature from another world. This unexpected encounter wasn't just a chance for survival. It was the beginning of something new. Chapter 2. The Sheltering Night. David had set up a makeshift shelter in his barn, where the alien, whom he'd started calling Kale, seemed to be recovering. The dim light of the barn cast long shadows across the wooden walls, and the soft rustling of the hay was a comforting background noise as David and his friend Mark, who had arrived after hearing the news, worked to make the space more secure. "Are you sure about this, David?" Mark asked, his voice low as he handed David some tools. "This is serious. We don't know anything about him. Or it." David tightened a bolt on a newly installed locking mechanism on the barn door. "I know, Mark. But he was hurt and alone. What was I supposed to do? Leave him out there to die?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. No, you did the right thing. It's just, you know how people will react. Not everyone will see this the way you do." "I'm aware," David replied, his gaze drifting over to Cale, who was quietly observing their conversation. "But I can handle some gossip for saving a life. Anyway, I need to figure out how to communicate with him properly." "Why not start simple?" Mark suggested, stepping closer to the alien. "Hello, Cale." "I'm Mark," he said clearly, extending a slow hand towards Cale, who watched curiously but did not respond. David chuckled. "I don't think it's that easy, but thanks for trying." Suddenly, Cale made a series of soft clicks and gestures, moving his slender fingers in the air. His movements were graceful, almost like a dance. David and Mark exchanged puzzled looks. "Seems like he's trying to tell us something," Mark noted. "Wish we had a universal translator like in those sci-fi shows." Jenny entered the barn with a digital tablet and a small device in her hand. "Maybe not a universal translator, but I brought the next best thing. It's a language analysis app. It helped me once when I was dealing with those traders from the Centauri system." "Always prepared, Jenny," David said with a relieved smile. "Let's give it a shot." Jenny activated the app and held the device towards Cale, who seemed intrigued by the technology. The app captured his clicks and gestures, analyzing them through its database. After a moment, the tablet chirped, and a text translation appeared on the screen. "I seek no harm. Thankful for shelter," read Jenny aloud, her eyes widening. Mark let out a low whistle. "That's a start. Welcome, Cale. We're here to help." Cale repeated the gesture, this time with what seemed like a nod of understanding. The group spent the next hour setting up a communication protocol, using the app to establish basic phrases and responses. David felt a sense of accomplishment. They were breaking ground on interspecies communication. As the evening progressed, David turned to more practical matters. "We'll need to keep this under wraps for a while, at least until we understand his intentions and condition fully." "Agreed," Jenny said. "I'll make discreet inquiries about Cale's species. There's bound to be information out there. Knowledge is safety." "And I'll reinforce the security around the barn," Mark added. "If word gets out, we might have unwanted visitors. I'm not just talking about the curious ones." David nodded, appreciating his friend's support. "Thanks, both of you. It means a lot." As they prepared to leave for the night, David set up a cot in the corner of the barn. "I'll stay here tonight, just in case he needs anything or someone tries anything. Call if you need anything, okay?" Jenny said, concern etched across her face. "Will do," David assured her, settling down beside a softly humming Cale. The barn was quiet, save for the occasional stir from Cale or the distant hoot of a nocturnal predator outside. As David lay there, watching the stars through the slats in the barn roof, he realized that this night might just be the beginning of a profound journey, not just for him, but for all of humanity. Chapter 3. The Bond Forms. Morning light streamed through the gaps in the barn, casting beams across the hay-strewn floor where David had spent the night. Cale was already awake, his luminous eyes reflecting the sunlight, giving him an otherworldly glow. David stretched and yawned, his first night in the barn more restless than he'd expected. "Morning, Cale. How are you feeling today?" Using the language app on the tablet, Cale replied. Better. Rest helps. His voice, synthesized through the app, had a melodic tone that was surprisingly calming. That's good to hear, David said, standing and dusting off his clothes. He noticed Cale's gaze following his movements, curious and attentive. Want to see more of this place? Cale nodded, and with the help of a makeshift crutch David had rigged up from barn tools, they slowly walked out into the fresh morning air. As they toured the small farm, David pointed out various plants he'd cultivated and the solar panels that powered his modest homestead. I try to live off the land as much as possible. What about your people? What's your home like? Through the app, Cale explained about his planet. Lush, green, rich in resources, but with delicate ecosystems that his people took great care to preserve. The parallels to Earth fascinated David, sparking a deep discussion on environmental stewardship and technology. As they talked, Mark arrived, his truck kicking up a cloud of dust as he pulled up to the barn. Morning, folks. How's our guest? David smiled, gesturing toward Cale. Learning a lot about each other. Cale was just telling me about his planet. Sounds fascinating, Mark said, as he unloaded some supplies from his truck. Brought some fresh produce and a few gadgets that might make communication easier. Cale observed Mark's actions with interest, and when Mark handed him a strange-looking fruit from the box, Cale's eyes lit up. Similar to Eutha Berry from home. He communicated via the app. Really? Mark chuckled. Here's hoping it tastes as good. David watched as Cale tentatively tasted the fruit, his face lighting up with pleasure. Good? David asked. Very good, Cale replied, and the men shared a laugh, the tension of the unknown easing slightly. Mark then presented a more advanced translator device he had been tinkering with. Thought this might help us ditch the app. It's a bit more real-time, he explained, setting it up. The device was more effective, allowing Cale's words to come through with less delay. They spent the rest of the morning tweaking the device, improving its accuracy, and by lunchtime they were able to have a near-normal conversation. Mark, you're a genius, David said, clapping his friend on the back. Just a tinkerer, Mark replied modestly, but glad it's working. As the day progressed, the three of them worked together on the farm, Cale's knowledge of botany coming in handy as he suggested slight modifications to David's techniques, advice that David welcomed. Later, as they sat under the shade of a large tree for a break, David brought up a more sensitive topic. Cale, can you tell us more about how you ended up here? It might help us understand how to help you get back. Cale's demeanor shifted, the light in his eyes dimming slightly. He explained his mission, purely exploratory, meant to chart uninhabited systems. A malfunction led him to crash on this planet, far from any known trade routes. His crew was lost, making him the sole survivor. The weight of his story hung in the air, heavy with the loneliness and accidental tragedy of his situation. David placed a reassuring hand on Cale's shoulder. We'll help you, Cale. Whatever you need to get back or to stay here safely. You're not alone anymore. Cale's response was simple, his voice through the translator tinged with emotion. Thankful. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the farm, the bonds of friendship, newly forged under the strangest of circumstances, felt as natural as if they had been years in the making. This unexpected chapter in David's life was just beginning, but already it promised to reshape his world in ways he had never imagined. Chapter 4. The Turn of Suspicion. David and Cale continued their routine of working together on the farm, blending earthly techniques with Cale's alien insights, which proved surprisingly beneficial for crop yields. However, the idyllic peace of their collaboration was soon overshadowed by the prying eyes of the local community. It was a crisp morning when David noticed a figure watching them from the edge of the woods. He nudged Mark, who had stopped by to help install a new irrigation system designed with Cale's suggestions. "See that?" David nodded subtly toward the figure. Mark squinted, then frowned. "Yeah. Seems you've caught the town's attention, buddy. I reckon it's about your new friend here." Cale, noticing their conversation had shifted, looked towards the figure, then back at David, his expression unreadable. "We knew this might happen," David sighed. He had hoped their small community's typical disinterest in his solitary lifestyle would protect Cale's presence from becoming a spectacle. Later that day, as David was restocking supplies in town, he ran into Pete, the local grocery store owner. Pete leaned in, lowering his voice. "Heard you've got some sort of secret project going on at your place, David. Care to fill me in?" David kept his tone nonchalant. "Just trying out some new farming techniques, Pete. You know how it is. Always experimenting." Pete nodded, though his eyes held a flicker of suspicion. "Sure, David. Just be careful, you know? People start talking when they see things they don't understand." Back at the farm, David relayed the encounter to Mark. "We can't keep Cale hidden forever. It's starting to stir up talk. We need a plan." That night, the men sat down in the barn with Cale to discuss their options. Cale had been learning fast, his command of English improving each day with the help of the advanced translator. "I understand concern," Cale said thoughtfully. "My presence here is risk for you." David shook his head. "We're in this together now. We'll figure something out." Mark proposed a proactive approach. "Maybe it's time to introduce Cale to a few trusted folks. Small steps. If a couple of other people know the truth and support us, it could dampen any wild rumors." David considered this. "Could work. But we choose very carefully. Maybe start with Jenny and a few others who know how to keep cool under pressure." The next day, they invited Jenny and her husband, Tom, over under the pretense of a casual dinner. After some light conversation, David led them to the barn. "Tom, Jenny, meet Cale." "He's the reason for all the secrecy," David announced as they entered the dimly lit space where Cale stood, calm and dignified. Jenny, who had met Cale briefly, smiled warmly, while Tom, a sturdy man of few words, extended his hand slowly to Cale. "Heard a lot about you, buddy." Cale took Tom's hand, the gesture significant and filled with meaning. "Thank you for coming." Tom nodded, looking Cale over with a thoughtful expression. "Well, David here trusts you, and that's good enough for me. But you're gonna need more than my okay if you're gonna stick around." The group spent the evening discussing how to manage the community's curiosity and fears. It was decided that Jenny and Tom would subtly spread positive rumors about David's project, framing it as innovative environmental research. As they left, Tom clapped David on the back. "You've got guts, David. We'll help keep the waters smooth as best we can." David watched them go, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. Turning to Cale and Mark, he said, "Well, that's step one. Let's hope it's enough." They all knew they were navigating uncharted waters, but with each other's support, the challenge seemed a little less daunting. As they returned to the house, the stars twinkled overhead, silent witnesses to their quiet rebellion against fear and misunderstanding. Chapter 5. The Breakthrough. Under the wide expanse of a starlit sky, David, Mark, and Cale walked through the field behind the barn. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of newly watered earth, a peaceful contrast to the growing tension within the community. "Seeing the stars always puts things into perspective," Mark mused, hands tucked into his jacket pockets as he glanced upwards. Cale nodded, his eyes reflecting the twinkling lights above. "In the vastness of space, our concerns seem so small." David chuckled. "Yet here we are, spending half our time worrying about what the neighbors think. They reached a clearing where David often came to think. The three of them sat on the large logs David had dragged there to create a makeshift seating area. Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We've managed to keep things quiet for now, but we're just buying time. Sooner or later, we need a solid plan for Cale's situation." Cale tilted his head, considering their words. "I have been thinking about this. Perhaps it is time to share some of my technology. If people see the benefits, they might view my presence more favorably." David raised his eyebrows. "That's a big risk. What kind of technology are we talking about?" "Efficient energy conversion, water purification, things that can help this community thrive," Cale explained. "Nothing that would cause harm or fear." Mark rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "That might work. People fear what they don't understand, but they sure love what helps them out. It could turn the tide in our favor." David nodded slowly. "It's a good plan, but we need to introduce it carefully. Maybe start with a small demonstration for a select few." They spent the next hour discussing potential strategies, considering every angle and implication. By the time they stood to head back, they had a tentative blueprint for moving forward. The following week, David arranged a small gathering at his farm under the guise of a community agricultural project presentation. He invited local farmers and a few influential community members, including the head of the local council. As the guests arrived, David felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Cale stayed back initially, watching from the shadows of the barn. "Welcome, everyone," David began, standing in front of a newly erected structure that housed some of Cale's technology. "Thank you for coming. Today, I want to demonstrate something that could change our farming practices for the better." The crowd murmured with curiosity as David unveiled a compact device that Cale had designed. It was a solar-powered water purifier capable of desalinating and purifying water without any chemical additives. "This is just the beginning," David announced as he demonstrated the device, producing clean water from a bucket of murky water collected from a local pond. The crowd watched in awe, whispering amongst themselves. The initial skepticism seemed to dissolve as they saw the clear water pouring out. Once the demonstration was over, David sensed the shift in the mood. "There's more, but I want to introduce someone very special who made this possible." He gestured towards the barn. Cale stepped out, his appearance no longer a shock but a curiosity to those gathered. "This is Cale. He's from another world, and he's here to help," David said, standing beside Cale. The crowd was silent for a moment before a few cautious claps started. Encouraged, others joined in. Mark, who had been watching from the side, joined David and Cale. "It's all about how you frame it," he whispered to David, a grin spreading across his face. Cale addressed the crowd, his voice calm and reassuring. "I hope to learn from you as much as you can learn from me. Together, we can achieve great things." As the event wrapped up, people came forward, some hesitant, others curious, to ask questions. The initial fear had turned to intrigue and even excitement. That night, as the last guest left, David, Mark, and Cale gathered in the barn, their faces lit by the soft glow of the purifier. "We've made a breakthrough," David said, relief evident in his voice. "Yes," Cale agreed. "Today was a good day." Mark clapped both on their shoulders. "Here's to many more." Their shared success that evening not only fortified their bond, but also marked a pivotal point in their journey, a journey that had just begun to bridge worlds with hope and cooperation. Chapter 6. Intimate Realizations. After the successful demonstration of Cale's technology, the atmosphere around David's farm had changed. There was a buzz in the community, a mix of excitement and cautious optimism that seemed to charge the air. Despite this, Both David and Cale felt the weight of new expectations and the need for privacy to discuss their next steps. It was late evening, and the sky was a canvas of deep blues and purples as the last light of day lingered on the horizon. David and Cale sat on the porch, each lost in thought, watching the stars emerge. "You did well today, Cale," David finally said, breaking the silence. "I think they're starting to see you as I do." Cale turned to look at him, his eyes reflecting the twilight. "And how is that? As a friend? Someone who's not just here to share technology, but to build something lasting." Cale nodded slowly, and there was a moment of quiet companionship between them. Then, as if compelled by the growing bond, Cale spoke, his voice low. "David, I have never felt this connection before, not with anyone from my planet, nor since I arrived here." David felt a warmth spread through him, unexpected but not unwelcome. "I feel it too," he admitted. "It's strange, isn't it? How two beings from different worlds can find such harmony." "Yes, harmony," Cale repeated, savoring the word. "Is this what friendship is on Earth?" "It's one of the best parts," David chuckled, then grew serious. "But it can be more, sometimes. More profound." They both fell silent, contemplating the depth of their connection. The air between them was charged, filled with an unspoken question about the nature of their relationship. Finally, Cale shifted closer. "On my world, when two beings feel a connection, they share a bond ritual. It's intimate, a sharing of energy and essence. It's beautiful." David's heartbeat quickened. "Is it something like love?" "Love." Cale tested the word as if tasting it for the first time. "Yes, I believe it is what you call love." The revelation hung between them, profound and electrifying. David reached out, his hand hesitating in the air between them before Cale reached out to close the gap, their fingers touching. The contact was electric, sparking a surge of emotion that was palpable. Encouraged by the contact, David leaned in, and their foreheads touched gently. It was a human gesture, but it felt right. They sat like that for a moment, simply breathing in each other's presence, the barriers of their different biologies irrelevant. "David," Cale whispered, his voice carrying a tremor of emotion. "May I share something with you?" "Anything," David replied, his voice equally soft. Cale then initiated a gentle, cautious touch to David's cheek, exploring the connection as they both closed their eyes. The touch deepened, not in a physical sense, but with an emotional intensity that was new to both of them. Slowly, their heads turned, and their lips met in a kiss that was tentative at first but grew in confidence as they got lost in the sensation. It was a kiss that spoke of mutual respect, curiosity, and a burgeoning love. As they pulled away, the world seemed to resume around them, the sounds of the night louder and more distinct than before. "That was—" David started, unable to find the words. "Good," Cale finished for him, a smile playing on his lips. "Yes, good," David agreed, laughing lightly, the tension released. They sat back, hands still joined, looking at the stars. "We have a lot to learn about each other, don't we?" David mused. "Yes, but I am eager to learn," Cale responded, squeezing David's hand. As the night deepened, they continued to talk, sharing thoughts and dreams, the bond between them solidifying with each word and touch. This night marked a new chapter in their relationship, one filled with the promise of understanding and acceptance. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The dawn brought a cool mist that settled over the fields of David's farm, a thin veil that seemed almost symbolic of the challenges they faced. News of Cale's existence and his remarkable technology had spread beyond their local community, drawing unwanted attention from curious outsiders and media. The quiet morning was a stark contrast to the storm David knew was brewing. David and Cale sat at the kitchen table, their coffee steaming untouched as they discussed their strategy. Mark joined them, his face lined with concern as he laid out the morning's news. "There's a reporter in town from the city," Mark informed them, his voice tense. "He's sniffing around, asking questions about the alien farmer. Word's getting bigger than we can handle." David rubbed his temples. "We knew this might happen. We need to control the narrative before it spirals." Cale nodded in agreement. "Transparency may be our best approach now. Share my story, our cooperation, and the benefits openly. Fear thrives in secrecy. It's a risk," Mark pointed out, "but it might be the only way to turn this tide." David looked at Cale, seeing the determination in his friend's eyes. "All right, let's do it. Let's arrange a meeting with this reporter. We'll tell our story, our way." Mark made the call, and by mid-morning the reporter, a young man named Aaron, arrived at the farm. He looked around with wide eyes, clearly trying to maintain his professional demeanor at the sight of Cale. "Thank you for agreeing to talk with me," Aaron said, extending his hand first to David, then hesitantly to Cale, who took it gracefully. "We think it's important that people hear the full story," David began as they all sat down under the old oak tree near the barn, a natural meeting spot that felt grounding. "Not just rumors and half-truths." Aaron set up his recorder, nodding. "I'm all ears. This could be the story of the century." Cale started, his voice calm and clear. "I come from a planet not unlike Earth, in a galaxy that you have yet to discover. My mission was exploration, not invasion. An accident brought me here, and necessity made me a farmer." David took over, explaining their collaboration and the innovations Cale had introduced. "His knowledge has helped us improve our sustainability practices immensely. It's a partnership that benefits everyone." Aaron listened intently, his initial skepticism softening as the story unfolded. "And the community? How have they reacted to Cale?" "Some were wary at first, but many have come to see the benefits," Mark added, giving examples of the improved crop yields and the water purification technology that Cale had introduced. The discussion moved to the future, and David emphasized their hopes for peaceful coexistence and mutual learning. "We can learn a lot from each other, not just in farming but in broader ways. Cale's presence here isn't a threat, it's an opportunity." Aaron took his time, asking thoughtful questions and occasionally pausing to let the weight of the information sink in. As the interview wrapped up, he looked between David and Cale. "This is going to make waves. But it's a good story, a story of unity and forward-thinking." As Aaron packed up, he paused, looking back at them. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I'll do my best to get it right." After Aaron left, the three men remained under the oak tree, a sense of cautious relief among them. "No matter how this turns out," David said, looking at Cale and Mark, "I'm glad we did it this way." Cale responded, "As am I, truth is powerful." Mark clapped both on their backs. "Now we wait and see. But whatever comes, we handle it together, like always." As they walked back to the house, the sun broke through the morning mist, casting long, golden beams across the farm. It was a new day, filled with uncertainty but also with the promise of new beginnings and the strength of unity. They were ready to face whatever came next, together. Chapter 8. A New Dawn. As the sun rose over the horizon, bathing David's farm in a soft golden light, the air was filled with a palpable sense of anticipation. The story of Cale and his contributions had been broadcast across various media outlets, sparking widespread interest and debate. But for David, Cale, and Mark, today was not just another day. It was a culmination of their efforts and perhaps the beginning of a new chapter in human-alien relations. David stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching as reporters set up their cameras at the farm's edge. Beside him, Cale adjusted the translator device at his throat, his expression one of calm resolve. "You ready for this?" David asked, turning to look at his friend. Cale nodded. "I am prepared. It is important for them to see us together, united in our purpose." Mark joined them, clapping both on their shoulders. "Let's show them what real cooperation looks like." The conference was set up in front of the barn, the very place where Cale had first been sheltered and healed. As the crowd of journalists and locals gathered, David stepped up to the microphone, clearing his throat as he looked out over the sea of curious faces. "Good morning," David began, his voice steady. "Today, we open our farm not just to show you a story of survival and innovation, but to demonstrate a partnership that transcends worlds." Cale took his turn to speak, detailing his journey and the crash that had left him stranded on Earth. He spoke of the initial fear and misunderstanding, and how those emotions had given way to friendship and collaboration. "As beings, we are different," Cale explained, his voice echoing through the translator with a slight hum. "But in our goals for sustainability and peace, we are aligned." Mark discussed the technical aspects, showcasing the devices and methods developed from combining Earth technology with Cale's knowledge. "These advancements are just the beginning," Mark asserted. "Together, we can tackle challenges far beyond what either of our species could face alone." The presentation included a tour of the farm, where the attendees could see the integrated technologies in action. Solar panels that operated at 3 times the efficiency of previous models, water purification systems that had already attracted the interest of several governmental agencies, and hybrid crops that promised to solve food scarcity issues in harsher climates. As the event drew to a close, the questions began, ranging from Cale's long-term intentions to the potential for further alien contact. Each was answered with honesty and a clear vision for the future. After the crowd had dispersed, David, Cale, and Mark retreated to the porch, each with a sense of relief and accomplishment. "We did well," Mark commented, watching as the last of the vans drove away. "Yes, we did," David agreed. "Do you think the world's ready for this, Cale?" Cale looked out at the horizon, where the sky met the lush green of Earth. "They are learning. Fear is often from the unknown, and today we made the unknown a friend." As they stood together, a message arrived on David's phone, an invitation for Cale and him to speak at an international conference on interstellar cooperation. It was an opportunity to take their message global, to truly influence the future of Earth's interaction with the stars. David showed the message to Cale, who read it carefully. "It seems our journey is not yet over," Cale said, a hint of a smile crossing his features. "No, my friend," David replied, clapping Cale on the back. "It's just beginning." As they looked out over the farm, now buzzing with the energy of new possibilities, the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows behind them and illuminating the path forward. This was their new dawn, bright, challenging, and full of potential.